Greetings to all, and welcome to Theology In Particular, a podcast of International Reformed Baptist Seminary. My name is Joe Anady. I serve as one of the pastors of Emmaus Reformed Baptist Church in Hemet, California, and I'm one of the hosts of this podcast. I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Daniel Scheiderer. He is pastor of Providence Reformed Baptist Church in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and assistant professor of Christian theology at IRBS. It's good to be with you, Daniel.
Good to be with you as well, brother. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. We're joined by a first-time guest, Dr. Matthew Grinder. He is a lecturer in research writing at IRBS. Matthew, it's a pleasure to have you on Theology In Particular.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
I think it would be best just to start by asking you to tell us a bit about yourself. Maybe you could tell us something of your upbringing, your conversion, your career, family. I know that's a lot, but please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, so it is good to be here. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in north central Montana. I grew up in a little tiny town at the time. It's grown since I left, but called Cutbank, Montana, which is really right next to Canada. My family, my dad was a high school teacher, and my mom worked in the social services office in Cutbank, and so we weren't financially well off for most of my life, but I was incredibly blessed to be part of a family that loved God. Grew up in a non-denominational church, which was an experience as I came in contact with things like the Reformed movement and especially Reformed Baptists as I grew up. But my grandfather was also a pastor, and my father was a high school teacher, but he also became an elder of our church. And so he followed in his father's footsteps that way. And then I grew up also going to various things like Bible camps and church camps and helping with ministries there. And so I've always been surrounded by a very strong Christian influence, a very strong biblical influence. And I really thank God for that. I think having that early on in my life was really beneficial. I did come to salvation when I was about 6. And I remember that day like really vividly still. My dad was still in college and we were living in student housing. It was hot because it was in summer and all the housing was cinder blocks. So it was like sitting in an oven. But my mom made sure that me and my 2 younger brothers took a nap every day when it was hot out so that we wouldn't be too tired getting closer to evening. And before we laid down to take a nap, she would always read us a Bible story from a Bible story book that we had. And the one that she liked the most was about the resurrection of Jesus after being hung on the cross. And after she read that story, she would always encourage us to think about what it meant to become a Christian. And one day I asked my mom to, what did it mean? And so we prayed together, and then we met with the pastor, and the pastor of our church, who did some really good counseling with me. And I received my first Bible after that, like my actual Bible, it was an old hardcover King James. And I think I read that until the cover fell off, and I still have it. It's very special to me. Of course, at 6, you don't really know what it all implies to be a Christian, but I was baptized, and I did join the church after I prayed with my mom, and I continued to be really excited all the way up until about that age of 15, when all of a sudden all excitement seems to drop off for everybody, and life gets hard. And that was, obviously I was rebellious to a certain degree, but I was never far from that root of my faith in Christ. And he always, and sometimes it was not gentle. I got yanked back as much as I tried to rebel. I was always brought back in various ways, using various people, various events in my life. that have led me to where I am today as a believer. So my parents, grandparents, my whole family, very influential.
That's wonderful, brother. I love hearing people's testimonies. We need to do more of this, I think, at our church, just giving people an opportunity to stand up and share. It's a part of the membership process, so we do hear something of their testimonies early on, but it's such an encouraging thing. Tell us about your family, brother.
Well, my family, my dad, he did become an English teacher, but it took him a little while. My parents they really wanted us to be able to read and write well. That was one of their primary goals, was not only will we be raised in a biblical Christian household, but we will also have an education. Part of that reason was when my dad graduated from high school, he had been intending to go into the military, and he was also a heavyweight high school wrestler. And from the trophies that my brothers and I found, he was a pretty good one. So, but his final match, he blew out his knee. And so he couldn't join the military, and his GPA was so low, he couldn't really do anything else. And so he had to work a few years before he could go to college and basically get life experience. Eventually, he did make it back to college, and he became an English teacher. And he was my English teacher when I finally made it to high school. And he's really where I got, he was the root, provided all the roots for what writing is. And I still teach that way. He was a big influence in even how I teach the methods of writing that I teach. But it was very clear, and but he could also be a very stern teacher. Especially when you're his son, you have to work probably 3 or 4 times harder than everybody else to achieve a good grade. So it was really hard to get an A, but I did. And my dad made sure that it was hard. So I was blessed that way as well. My mom she didn't go to college. For a while, she ran an in-home daycare. She loves kids. She loves taking care of small children. And so up until I was about 14 or 15, when she was inspected by the government, and the government told her that she could not have an in-home daycare without proper licensing, and they did not allow her to have the appropriate licensing. So she did some odd jobs until she got hired to work at the, she worked in the office that deals with food stamps, and she did that until retirement. And so that's what my parents did. I have 2 younger brothers, Stephen, who is right after me, and Joel, the youngest. And we all, we all grew up getting the same discipline and feedback. I was probably more rebellious than both of them put together, but so I was the grand experiment in how to deal with these things. But they both grew up and they're Christians. They are very solid Christians. My brother Stephen lives in Wyoming, and he works with insurance companies and insurance investigations. He's married to his wife Judy, great couple, and just very, very loving and very, very compassionate. Then my youngest brother Joel, he was in the Army for a long time. He retired from the Army about 5 years ago, and he was already certified to be a counselor, but he also went to seminary and got his Master of Divinity so that he could work towards eldership in a church, or gifted brother status in a church. And then unfortunately, my dad did pass away in 2014 due to health complications. That was a big loss, both just in the loss of a father, but also somebody who has such a spiritual influence on our lives, and particularly my life, where we would have very meaning, and I'm sure he did this with my younger brothers too, but just very meaningful conversations about where I was in life, what he was doing at the same time in my life, and what he was doing in his Bible reading and who he was talking with, to kind of talk through the big issues that come up at each age. And so it was a pretty hard hit when he passed away.
Mm-hmm. Are you married?
I am. I have a wife, Sarah, and she's working. She was actually the person who introduced me to Reformed theology, which I did spend a significant amount of time resisting for a variety of reasons, mostly because I was taught to be resistant to that as I was growing up as well. Things like the predestination, which was not super popular where I grew up. It was kind of a stumbling block for a little while with me. It took me a lot of thinking, a lot of studying, a lot of pastoral. I did some worked with my pastor in pastoral counseling to gain a better education of what it meant, what all of the things that I disagreed with meant. And it was great. He walked me through the 1689 confession, and gave me reading material that kind of got me up to speed on what does this mean to be Reformed, and particularly a Reformed Baptist. And so my wife was very instrumental in introducing me to the Reformed. And then when we got to Maine, there were still phone books around, so we were looking for a church, and we found Grace Reformed Baptist Church at the time. I don't remember if that's what it was, if that was its name, but we found it in the phone book, and it was close by, so we decided to just go there. And we expected to visit a couple churches before we settled on one, but as soon as we got there, I don't know how many of you know Frank Strickland, but he is a delight, and he was the first person that we met. He ran right up to us, made us feel very welcome. And then we met Ron Baines, who was the pastor before Micah. We met Ron Baines, and he immediately adopted us into his family. And we spent a lot of Sundays eating lunch with him. So my wife was the reason I'm even here at IRBS right now, is because she introduced me to that. But she also, my wife is also just a really, really delightful. She works with children as an occupational therapist, and she really loves her job. And sometimes she comes home, and it's probably a good thing she's an occupational therapist, because she helps me with some of the things that I need help with, like sometimes how to not walk into a wall because I'm not paying attention, things like that. So she's very, she's just a very loving and caring person all the way around. And she's been she's been my rock for the last 21 years. So yeah, she's been great. We don't have any children. We did adopt a 10-year-old girl at one point, and she was lovely. But also by the time she was about 16, she was pretty ready to strike out on her own. So she emancipated from us and she went out on her own. She's always welcome back if she wants to come back. It's one of those prodigal children kind of things, and we'll see with time whether or not she comes back. But she was great, and we love her. We love her very much. We still love her very much. So it was great to be able to adopt and have that child around for as long as the Lord determined that we would have her around.
Wonderful. You teach a course at IRBS, but it's not what you do for a career entirely. Tell us about your career, brother.
My career, well, I was a little bit late coming back to education for some reasons that I'll talk about as we go through some of these ideas that have formed my teaching. So I dropped out of university 2 years into it. It was just not a good place for me to be at the time. I was burned out on education. I was very disorganized all the way around. I couldn't organize myself very well, and I was probably I was more argumentative than is good for a student to be, which led to just kind of being miserable at college. So I left, and it took me another 2 years before I joined the military. And I ended up joining the military because I needed to find a good job so I could marry my wife. So, not having any options, I took the military route, which was probably the best thing I ever did, because they taught me how to get organized. They taught me how to even organize just all from my sock drawer all the way up through organizing my ideas, so that they would be clear and concise. Then it was after the military that I was about 31 or so when I decided to just get back into my education. I did it all online. For my undergrad, I just did challenge tests until I got to the last 2 years that I actually had to take with a college. I did my master's degree, and I did my master's degree in it's considered a dual master's. It's one master's, but two focuses in rhetoric and literature. And then I went to Union Institute University, which has since closed for a variety of reasons. But I finished my PhD with them about 5 years ago, at about age 40, and I got my PhD in literature. But it was considered an interdisciplinary degree where I didn't just study literature. I studied generally all the humanities and how all the humanities affected literature and vice versa. And so it was an interesting education. After that, I about 10 years ago, I got hired to teach Introduction to College Writing and Ethics at community college. Since I had to wait to get my PhD before I could teach at the university. I teach at the University of Southern Maine as well. And there I do a variety. I teach a variety of subjects. I teach Introduction to College Writing, an Introduction to Academic Writing. And then I also work with the Occupational Therapy Department with their doctoral students in helping them modify their papers for publication. And so I do a lot of work around literary studies, literary philosophical studies, and the actual ideas that come out of things like rhetoric and how they all fit together to kind of form our thought processes and how that affects society and culture.
Well, I think that's a good segue point to asking, what is it that you teach for IRBS? I'm assuming, well, I actually know the answer, but it has to do with writing, and as you've hinted at, more than hinted at, as being your particular interest and focus. So yeah, what exactly is it that you teach, and then how did this arrangement come about? I think students know, people coming into seminary know you're going to take some Greek and Hebrew, you're going to take some theology courses, probably some church history courses, but IRBS has invited the writing guy in. So what is the class that you teach, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so at IRBS, I teach PT 401, which is an introduction to academic writing. And I've tailored it largely to fit into the culture, the academic culture of the seminary. And the way this came about was one day I don't even remember how many years ago. It must have been like 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. I got an email from Micah Renahan, who is my pastor, who received an email from Jim Renahan, who is his father, asking if he knew, or if he would, if asking Micah if he would actually grade some papers for a class on writing that they had. And Micah didn't have the time. And so he emailed me and asked if I would be interested. And I said I would be interested. And as I was going through the course, there were some recorded lectures, and they were good lectures, but they were also really complex lectures, like taking rhetoric all the way back to Aristotle and then studying the history of rhetoric, which is fine to do. I think if you're going to be in an academic setting, you should know where rhetoric comes from, how it developed for the area that you are actually specializing in. But for somebody who's just coming into an academic program, I felt like it was too much. And the writing that I was grading was okay, but I thought that it could also be better. So that's when Dr. Renahan and I, Jim Renahan and I, sat down together and started planning how can we introduce students who are having problems in their writing. How can we introduce them to academic writing that's going to be expected of them at the graduate level? Because at the graduate level, teachers are not going to teach you how to write. They're going to expect you to know how to write. And so most academics who don't study writing, if writing is not your specialty, it's really hard to teach it because you only know your methodology for how you go through things. And so we started designing this course so that it can meet the needs of seminary students seminary and certificate students who wanted to be there, but needed a little boost in their rhetoric knowledge and how to present themselves on paper in an academic way. So we've been kind of playing with form, like the way the class is, how I do readings, how the class is formatted, what can make the class better. So we've been kind of honing the class over the last couple of years to make sure that it's staying academically relevant to what's happening for students at IRBS.
Maybe if I could just follow on to that.
Yeah.
As on the other side of that, not teaching writing directly, but requiring writing, and just seeing the importance of that particular class. So when seminary as a thing began in say the early 1800s, at that time, and the person that qualified to get into seminary was somebody who had a bachelor's degree, an undergraduate degree, and came into seminary to do further directed and focused study on theological issues so that they could train for the ministry and so forth. That standard undergraduate degree was a liberal arts degree, though. And so that meant they knew how to teach. They knew how to think, how to read, how to write, how to reason. They knew rhetoric. They would have read Aristotle's rhetoric and all of these things at the undergraduate level before coming into seminary, so that the seminary professors could expect them now to employ those things in ways that were specifically suited to the work of theological writing. In the last 200 years or so, there's been a shift in education writ large. And in addition to that, or as a component part of that, there's been a move to specialization at the undergraduate level. And so students get, the advent of STEM disciplines and all of that. And so what happens is students will go and get their undergraduate degree. And sometimes that undergraduate degree is in business administration. Sometimes it's in a STEM field. Sometimes it's in nursing or some other field that would have been considered more of a an active, vocational training program. Sure. And yet, seminary is still an educational endeavor that is built on the presumption that you have a liberal arts education. And so there has to be some sort of bridge, at least to some extent, helping students to get up to speed for the kind of work that seminary education is seeking to do. And so I think your class is particularly important for that. Dr. Dolezal has taught philosophy for theology or something. I forget the exact title of the course, but that would be another one of these where you would have gotten that. Everybody would have gotten that at the undergraduate level when seminary as an institutional type of endeavor began. That now, for one, the philosophy that they're getting in university undergraduate education is deplorable. It's anti-philosophy in a real sense, where it's against sort of realism and consideration of nature and these kinds of things, and it's all language games, and it's all imposition on reality and things like that. So like the philosophy that people are getting is garbage, and then that's if they're getting philosophy at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most students aren't required to take philosophy for their degree.
That's right. And so then we have to somehow, we can't replicate the liberal arts education as a seminary, but we have to somehow give men some of these earlier tools to be able to succeed in seminary. Even something as simple as Greek. So that's another one where, at least when I went through seminary, I'm assuming it's still the same, but elementary Greek was considered a remedial course because seminary used to assume that you learned Greek in your undergrad, and then they were going to build on it. A lot of people will talk about going to seminary because you have to learn the languages. That actually didn't used to be the case. You learned the languages in your undergrad. You learned how to reason theologically, from those earlier tools once you moved into seminary, and so I think this is a very helpful and important course for helping men to be able to write well.
Absolutely. Okay, I was just going to respond to Daniel's comment about what students don't know as they're coming into seminary, and it really because this is something that they're dealing with at kind of the university level as well for undergrads, is how do we bridge the gap between humanities and sciences? And that's some of the work that I tend to do a lot of thinking about and reading on is, the humanities become the root of education, even vocational education. But it's especially important for complex thinking when you get to something like a graduate program in a seminary or a graduate program in philosophy. So I do think that there's a case to be made that for our students at IRBS to be strong, they're going in their education, they're going to need to maybe do a little extra work, which found out when I did my master's in the humanities that, I had a lot of extra work to do to be able to get to the end of it. And so just doing a little bit of that extra work in, why are the humanities so important to theology? And especially something like philosophy, and especially how you write about those ideas. So it's all connected. We just like to disconnect things.
Yeah, Matt, could you take just a moment and give a high-level overview of what it is that you teach in this course? What are the things that you touch on?
So the things that I touch on in this course are largely around, the first thing I try to teach students to do is not how to write, but how to read. Because all writing is dependent upon what it is you're reading. Reading is also important because before you write, you have to be able to analyze ideas. And the format for how we analyze ideas at this level is in text, or what we might call book technology. So we have to use books and we have to learn how to read those books in an appropriate mindset to be able to sit down and analyze the book, to analyze the text. And that's where our writing begins. Our writing begins when we have something to write about. But we don't have much to write about until we start reading. And so we start the course off by learning what does it mean to read in an academic setting. I follow that up with some reading on what does it mean to write academically. And this is a paper that I particularly like. It's called "Who is Writing For?" I believe is the title. If not, I'll send you the correction. But what it does is it talks about the nature of academic writing and starts upsetting and fighting against some of the logic that's been used even now for students. So it undoes myths. Like one of the myths that students come into a writing classroom with is that if I write a long paper, it proves I'm smart. So the longer my paper is, the smarter I'll look to the teacher. And I have to start teaching them that and undoing that notion that no, length is nothing. It says nothing about the quality of what you've written. So you could write a paper that's 20 pages long, but it falls apart halfway through because you don't have a solid thesis, or you don't have good subtopics, or you don't have enough research. And so you don't have to write longer to look smart. You just have to write clearly, and then your intelligence will be reflected in how you've put that idea onto paper. Another one that I have a hard time with getting students over, and these two kind of go together. One is the genius fallacy, followed by the some got it, I don't fallacy, where students come in and they're like, well, in order to write at this level, I mean, I'm reading my teacher's papers, or I'm reading all these academic papers, and I'm just never going to be able to write like that. These people are geniuses. I'm like, well, that's not true. And I actually don't care for terms like genius. I really don't like them because it does a couple of things to students. Is it sets the bar incredibly high. So if you have a student who performs really, really well, and you call that student a genius, now all the rest of the students in the class are going to have anxiety about not being able to do what that student has done. And so teaching students that there is no, the genius here is that somebody did, and I like to use people like Dr. Renahan or Dr. Dolezal. I'm like, these are men who sat down and researched and researched and researched. And then they wrote and wrote and wrote. And they wrote again and again and again until they got to a draft that could be published. So it was practice. It was a writing and reading practice that they were engaging so they could get to the end of a project and have that project be a coherent whole. And that's what the some got it, I don't fallacy, the genius fallacy leads to that some got it, I don't fallacy, where it's like, I'm just not a good writer. And I cannot count the number of students every semester over the last 10 years who let me know right off, I'm sorry, but I really suck at writing. And I'm like, that's why you're here. That's like, if that's how you feel, it's a good thing you're here because I'm going to help change your attitude around that. Because if you come in with this negative attitude, chances are this is how you're going to write. So really just trying to help students get over some of those big obstacles that academic institutions and even educational institutions in K through 12 have a tendency to feed in a student. So trying to reduce the anxiety as they come into a writing class is one of the first things I try very hard to do. And once we talk about how to read and reducing the anxiety that academic writing is for everybody, everybody who wants to do it, we then start just doing that. We start reading, and they keep a journal on what they're reading. And the journal takes the form of short for each reading they do, which they do 5 or 6 readings right off the bat when the class starts. So over the course of the first month, we talk about analytical reading. And what they have to do with each reading is they have to use just the 5-paragraph model to write down a short analysis of each reading. And it has to be in a complete SBL format with footnotes and a reference list, even if that's the only source they're using. It's practice for formatting. And a lot of students will look at me like I've gone crazy. They're like, that's really short. I'm like, it is really short. So what do you imagine you have to do if it's going to be really short? Well, I guess I'm going to have to be really clear. Like, exactly. That's what this short model is intended to do, is help you with clarity. Then as you practice, your work will get longer. You won't stay in this 5-paragraph model. You're going to grow out of it, but your thoughts are going to be structured in a way that is comprehensible because you have learned to classify or to organize your ideas according to a standard. And so we begin to do that, and they do that over and over again, 5 or 6 times until we get to the end of the analysis. But part of the reason I do this 5-paragraph model and analysis is because it allows people to learn the logic behind writing, and that you can say things because words are there to say things, but you can say things with words and not say too much. It's really easy to say too much, to over-explain. So the reason I start with these things is part of it is to undo the idea that a sermon and an essay are the same thing. I often have students who submit sermons rather than papers. And so we have to talk about that difference, that, a sermon is something that you're going to give like almost like a public talk. Yes, you're going to have notes, and it might be organized, and it might even look like it could be an essay, but it's not an essay. You would have to reorganize it and restructure it for it to fit an essay format. So you can transform a sermon into an essay, and you can even transform an essay into a sermon, but they're two different things that serve two different purposes. A second thing that I'm trying to help them unlearn is what the Anglican thinker John Stott calls double listening. I'm trying to teach them to not just listen to one thing. You're in an academic setting now. And what's really cool about teaching at a seminary is I get to go into a little more detail on this concept of double listening, where John Stott says, yes, you need to pay attention first and foremost to a biblical view. You must pay attention to the biblical view. Then you can proceed into doing research and listening for that biblical view as you're doing research, knowing what the research is saying. And John Stott applies it to the way we deal with culture as well. So you are listening to culture, but you're not compromising your faith. You know what's out there, so now you know how to respond. And that's what I'm trying to teach them to do in research. You need to listen, double listen, first and foremost to the Word of God, and then to the secondary research sources, so that you can make a better decision on whether or not you should use that research. And then finally, I incorporate another Anglican thinker, Alan Jacobs' concept of the law of love, or governing our reading and writing through that command to love God, to love the Lord your God, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. So you are never writing an essay for yourself. You are writing it to an audience who's going to read it. And we want to be able to participate with our audience in a good, beautiful, and true manner. So we don't want to overemphasize things like illogical thinking through stirring their emotions or making somebody feel nostalgic, or just flat out working them into a rage. We want them to think in the same fashion that we're thinking when we're writing. We are doing this for the glory of God, and we are doing it in order to pursue the Word of God and to bring that first and foremost into view. So whether you're doing theological writing or whether you're doing a piece for social justice, the goal is that you're doing it to the glory of God and you're doing it out of love. And that also helps students when they go to read something, because a lot of times, and I found this everywhere, but oftentimes people who are Christians have a tendency to approach certain types of reading with suspicion or desire to prove their mastery of the subject over the author. I'm like, no, we need to sit in love and be humble. It doesn't mean we're not going to come back and disagree. We can always disagree, but we must also disagree after we have the whole picture, and we must disagree in love. And that shapes the way we do writing in the course. So no reactionary. It can't be a sermon. And you need to first and foremost listen to the biblical view before you jump into research.
Many of the faculty members do what we call faculty fora in throughout the academic year, where we present some kind of either work that we've completed or work that we're doing or something related to our discipline, and we invite students to come on. And so in the spring, you presented on writing and AI, and you offered both a response to AI and a positive understanding of what writing is aiming after. So I thought it might be good to hear from you. Just a summary, not the whole faculty forum. Yeah, but something like so AI undermines the purpose of academic writing. Use of AI for writing your paper or something like that undercuts the purpose of writing in the classroom, writing for the classroom, for your professors and so forth. That's kind of the payout or the payoff of this more positive argument or idea that you have. And so I was wondering if maybe you could share, what is it that writing is supposed to be doing for students in the academy as students in the academy? You've already started to work on that, like started to put some of those building blocks in place. But yeah, why do we have them write papers?
Yeah. Yeah. So students write papers for a couple of really big reasons. First of all, they write papers because it helps them logically organize their thoughts. And when you logically organize your thoughts on paper, you turn it in, what you're actually doing is you're joining a larger conversation on the idea that you're writing about. And so writing your paper out is really important because you're joining a conversation, and you want to join that conversation with a good foundation in integrity. And so writing is designed to facilitate thought, for sure, and to organize that thought, but it also reflects on your virtue as a thinker. And what AI is being used for, and very unethically so right now, is a lot of students are using it, and I'm going to clarify this because it's generative AI that they're using. I certainly, and in my faculty forum talk in the paper, the idea was this is a big debate that's been going on for a long time. Every time new technology comes up, there's a fight over what old technology is better or new technology is better. But one of the things that we want to keep in mind is if you're using AI to write your entire paper, like the whole of it, like you just go to generative AI and plug in the class instructions for the paper, and then you take whatever it kicks out, you have just proven that you don't have academic integrity. And if that's discovered, you could be punished for that lack of academic integrity. And I've seen students get everything from a slap on the wrist to expelled. So you can have some harsh consequences from using AI. But also, when you use generative AI, it's not helping you learn how to organize those ideas in a conversational way. AI doesn't have a good conversation. And I always encourage my students in the undergrad program because it does do some very positive things. Like when you have a very large project, you can input the information from the project in, and it can give you a pretty decent outline. And that can be helpful. But you're not going to submit the outline as your outline. It's going to be a guide. There's AI in all the writing tools that we use right now, from grammar correction to helping people with who don't speak English as their first language, translator apps, even apps for people who have various disabilities and learning disabilities. AI is there and it works pretty well, but we want to be cautious because we also don't want to remove the human factor out of the writing that we're doing, because you cannot have an academic conversation without the human factor. And especially for a seminary, my thing is with all my students, but especially and particularly at a seminary, is you need to think about your own integrity. Because you are going into some kind of ministry position where you want to be considered an elder or a gifted brother or a deacon. You need to have integrity because people need to be able to trust your information. And people will probably ask where you got your information from. I've seen that happen. And you cannot refuse to give that. It's transparency. You have to be able to give that to people who are curious to learn more. And if you say no, my question would be why? Why would you say no? Because it can only mean a couple things. And one of those things might be that you use generative AI to write your notes for you, and maybe even generative AI to create a presentation for you. And so one of the things that we want to keep in mind, the reason we write is because that is still the academic standard for communication. It is still the standard for joining the academic conversation. And so because that's still the norm, we have to hold up that norm because it's what is right now. It's what is across the academy. And we have to do that out of our own thoughts, out of our own intellect, out of our own hard work. Mm. And so we don't want AI to detract from that.
Yeah. When we're administering exams, I tell students this, it's not a gotcha. When we do like a final exam or something like that, we're not trying to get a gotcha on the students and belittle them or anything like that. We are examining, in particular, the formation of the student. Has the soul, the mind, been formed by the content that of the course, of the given course? And in a lot of ways, what we're doing when we're asking to read your writing, it's not so much to say, look at all the grammatical and stylistic mistakes, although those matter, because
yes,
it reflects on care and precision and those kinds of things. But, have they been formed by the very things that they've been considering as they've been preparing this paper? And in the pulpit as well, going to your point about we're training men, when a man stands in the pulpit and opens the word of God and says, "Thus saith the Lord," what he's saying is not only "Thus saith the Lord," but my soul has been formed by this word that I now bring to you.
Yeah.
And so of course that challenges against hypocrisy as you stand in the pulpit. I'm not just going to say, don't, do this, and you should do this, and you should trust Jesus because he is satisfying to the soul and a sure and steady comfort and anchor and so forth. But I have known my soul has been formed by this reality, and now I express it. And so, yeah, AI can't do that for you.
No. Well, and with writing too, to your point about we're testing your ability to put this information together and have your soul and mind been formed. I tell my writing students right at the beginning of class is your writing is going to reflect what's happening in your heart. I have never had a writing student who could hide behind their paper because you only bring yourself to the paper. So your thoughts, your feelings for that day, your upbringing, your background, it all comes and it all pours out in the way you write about a topic onto the paper. So you cannot hide and you can't hide behind AI because, believe it or not, and I get my students at the university like this sometimes, and I do feel like it's a gotcha thing, but when they turn something in that is not human, there's no heart behind it. There's no stuttering. There's no hesitations. There's perfect grammar, which I always tell my students, there's no such thing as a perfect paper either. So they, and I give it back to them. I'm like, rewrite this in your own words. And they ask, well, what do you mean? I'm like, you definitely used AI for this because your grammar is perfect. And your words, I'll ask them what some of the words mean and they don't know. And I'm like, well, then you shouldn't be using them. You should only be using the vocabulary that you have at your disposal right now and growing that vocabulary through the reading that you're doing and then practicing using these words once you know what they mean. So when you turn in a paper that is AI generated, you're also showing part of your heart. You're showing the internal aspects of your virtue.
Yeah, Paul says that, right? He says when you read this, you can perceive the insight I have into the mystery of Christ, and so that there's and we know this. We read the epistles and we say, I know Paul, because his soul is so in the thing that he's writing. Or even just later writers, you read the sermons of Richard Sibbes or commentaries of Calvin or something like that. And you know that you're encountering the man, not merely words on a page, because his soul is reflected in the things that he's writing.
And I would say that that's the idea of a living literature. Right. It's a person dumped their entire essence into writing this, and it shows because I can have a conversation with it. If I can't have a conversation with it, then maybe I need to read it again. Maybe I need to talk to somebody who knows the work so that I can figure out how best to have a conversation with it. But also, if you can't have a conversation with it, then it's really interesting to start thinking about, okay, was AI used here? Because AI does not leave room for a conversation. AI says, basically, this is what it is, because it's only been given a set of data to process, and that's all it can do. And so you do expose a lot of who you are in both how you write, the method you go about writing it, and how you submit that final paper.
Matt, this has been really enjoyable. It's been good to get to know you as a person, as one of the lecturers at IRBS, and also it's good to know that this material is being taught to the students at IRBS. Excellent. Just so happy to know that this is being presented. at the seminary. Brother, you mentioned one recommended resource, Who is Writing For, an article. Do you have anything else that you'd like to bring to our attention, maybe a good book on this subject?
Well, on the subject of writing, that's a little that's a little tougher because there's not really a great book on writing. But I would say that there's some good books on humanities. One of the books that I would recommend is Patterns of History by the Dutch scholar Rensbod. And it's a book where he's written it. He incorporates, how writing develops, but he incorporates how the humanities basically develop and how we can look back at history and see that pattern of development and how we are where we are now based on that history of development. And I always thought that was fascinating because a lot of the use that we get out of God's word is also considering these patterns of human history and how God has shown himself in each pattern of human history to be our Lord and God. So that's one that I would highly recommend. And it will give you a platform from which to start your writing. Now you know something, so now you can write something.
Great, brother. Thanks again. And to our audience, I hope this conversation's been helpful to you. If it has, please consider sharing it with others. And lastly, don't forget to check back with us next Monday for a new episode. Until then, abide in Christ.
Thank you for listening to Theology in Particular. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future podcasts, please email tip@irbsseminary.org. For more information about the seminary, go to irbsseminary.org. IRBS is a confessional seminary committed to the inerrant and infallible Word of God as summarized in the Second London Confession of Faith. Since our podcast sometimes addresses issues outside the confession, please understand that the views and opinions expressed on Theology in Particular are not necessarily those of IRBS, its trustees, or every faculty member.